Service teams are really aiming to involve users of a service throughout. So traditionally, teams have maybe been asked to come up with new policy and maybe a new website or app that allows citizens to access a new service related to that policy. And maybe for the digital parts of that, let's say there's a website or app that's going to be used as part of accessing that policy or realizing that policy, requirements are put together, and maybe a system is built or maybe even procured to meet those requirements. That's quite risky because often there'll be some big assumptions about how the policy will actually work or how the website or app will need to work to realize the policy. And then when you put it in front of real people, it just doesn't work as you intended, no matter how many experts were involved in dreaming that up in the first instance. And that can take a lot of time to correct, and depending on how a service is procured, it can be really expensive. So what service teams do is they involve users of the service throughout. So they research with them up front to understand their needs and how the policy can meet them, and in many cases then adjust the policy to meet that better. They'll make prototypes of the sorts of services or websites or apps they're making while the policy is still being developed, so they can test those assumptions. If there's something really big and unknown in there, make something really quickly, even if it's very rough and ready, put it in front of people, get their thoughts and steers, and also put it in front of internal stakeholders too. And that all of that kind of feedback can mean that you can change course nimbly. In a kind of service development world, teams are instead tasked to deliver a certain set of outcomes for users or for the business themselves. So the kind of the autonomy or the is really devolved over to the team. So that team is normally formed of a set of experts, multidisciplinary. So you've got a nice mix of different kind of perspectives on the problem there: developers, policymakers, designers, service designers, researchers, and they're asked essentially to figure out the best way themselves to do that. Now, for some organisations, that feels quite risky because they're essentially giving over a lot of responsibility to a team, and so that can feel quite nerve-wracking for some leaders. Um, but actually, the team are often the best people to figure out the way to solve a problem because they've got the expertise and because they're closest to the users that they're serving. So the work, they work out the biggest areas of opportunity or maybe uncertainty within a particular kind of area. Is this going to be the right thing for teachers, or is it going to be the right thing for whatever the end users are? And they research those and they build prototypes really early to figure out the best sort of approach, and to help kind of keep nervous leaders on track and making sure they have a regular chance to feed into what's going on. They're held to account regularly through fortnightly sort of show and tells where they can show the work done. They can show the research they're doing that validates they're going in the right direction, or actually suggests that maybe they're going in the wrong direction. And then looking at those sorts of failures and thinking about how they're going to correct course or change what they're doing. And they can summarize their progress and their plans, and they can do that also at kind of program boards and divisional and directorate level as well. But the idea is that fortnightly, very regular kind of rhythm allows people to kind of keep up to date, and there's no kind of big surprises in this model. Teams have to work together quite closely across a service line, and a service line is essentially a set of services that deliver a number of outcomes, possibly for the same sorts of users. So, for example, if I'm a trainee teacher, I might be considering thinking about teaching, and I'd like to speak to somebody about that. So I need a service to deliver that. And then if the next thing I'm going to do is consider applying, then the next service in the line, if you like, is applying for a place, and so on and so on. And you can see how actually there may be some users who need to interact with a set of services, perhaps in a sequence, not necessarily one directly after the other. It could be months and months between them. But that's the idea of a service line. And I think the other thing to say about a service line as well is that it doesn't have to be linear. It might be that people dip in and out of different services at different times. But the idea is that it should feel cohesive and coherent. And if you're coming back to it from a user perspective, it should be more of a welcome back rather than you're completely new, give us all of your information again. No one likes that. So that's the idea really with service lines, and that's what I take from it in terms of understanding that as a concept. And in a division like teacher services, where there are lots of teams working together on services, in the same space. They're all looking at how to improve the journey of becoming a teacher. It's important to make sure the teams that work on those are working on the most impactful things. So, they're not just kind of endlessly kind of going and looking at one particular area and kind of trying to improve that, but they're actually looking at the whole piece and thinking, okay, right, we've got all of these services. Where can we have the biggest impact and make a part of it better or introduce something new? It's also really important to make sure that those teams are aware of each other's work, because if not, then they might actually be trying to solve the same problem, or they might actually be kind of looking away from a big problem that's kind of emerging in a particular space. And how do the leadership of teacher services do that? Well, a few different things. So they have a vision and strategy map that actually tries to sort of look at how all of the different services and teams that are working together on the digital footprint, if you like, of the teacher workforce directorate. How do they all fit together? How do they deliver to the teaching workforce directorate of strategic objectives? So there is a map that kind of shows that. And those sorts of objectives are really long running, actually. That sort of strategy probably refreshes every 4 or 5 years or so. And so it's really helpful to be able to connect actually the different services, which may change a bit more frequently than that, back up to why are we all here again? What are we doing? And that also allows you to see where people are working quite near to you or where they're working quite far away from you as well.